Buenas tardes, compas. Bienvenidos al sexto asalto de
Welcome to our sixth round, 200 years. This is of against imperialism. My name is Danny. I'm from the Department of Social Investigations. This promised to be a very powerful round. We're going to talk about possible worlds. It's a round that is fight through words, through images, through culture, through aspirations of people. So this last round, it's fundamental to explain how to proceed in the future. We're having problems hearing our moderator, Danny. So hold on a minute.
Hola, hola, hola. ¿Ahí se escucha? ¡Oh, Dios, qué terrible! ¿Empezamos de nuevo? ¿Rolen la cámara otra vez? ¿Hacemos como un... así? Muy bien, entonces toma 2. Y a veces en los rounds pasa eso.
This is take 2, a hug of comprehension to everybody. The other one was only an exercise. Dear comrades, welcome to the 6th round, the last round of against imperialism. Danny is I'm part of the social investigations of the Tricontinental. This is a very powerful round because we are going to talk about the languages of construction of the future. This land of ideas, a fight of ideas. How do we construct through art, images, culture? It's a ring to fight, not to recede, not even for an instant. We want to invite, we will first hear the comrades from Bolivar Institute, which will bring this short video. We are here on the last round on this seminar, Bolivar versus Monroe. Bolivar is in our culture. I want to begin reading this fragment done by the governor of Maracaibo. It says, Bolivar, the genius of bad, the oppressor of his land, has ceased to exist. This is part of the idea to destruct a Bolivar. And obviously, U.S. was behind all this project to destruct the Bolivarian project, to take out Bolivar from the heart of Venezuelans and Latin Americans. When he's brought to the Pantheon, National Pantheon, necropolis, he was presented as an hero, but far and distanced from the people. The important thing is that we need to take Bolivar figure to rescue the figure of Bolivar as a people's people, someone who would share. Bolivar, it's always been in the altars. In this syncretism, Bolivar is almost even a mystical figure to whom people would ask for things as a saint, to say. When we talk about a naive painting in our culture, Bolivar is present. In music, Bolivar is present. In our culture, Bolivar is present. And that's why we bring today this singer and composer, Alejandro. And we want to hear his reflections on how are we winning in Barlovento. That's that campaign you're talking about. Simón de la Trinidad would write about Bolivar. This black hood, the freedom, the first freed slaves and black people will enhance the figure of Bolivar, not because of romanticism, but because of the things he did, Bolivar. It is important when you began referring to altars to Bolivar as almost as a mystical figure where whom people would ask, will pray. There is a lot of reference for Bolivar. Maria also, as an author, immortalized Bolivar. And those are only some examples of how people immortalized Bolivar. There is also a song where we practice the counter way to the Monroe doctrine. That song, a militant song, that Bolivarian song, was once was the first time in reference to Bolivar, comparing a Bolivar figure to Marx. And we are co-participants, co-authors of this posture to rescue Bolivar. Where the climax of this movement to rescue Bolivar was happening during the 60s and the 70s. It's a culture not to immortalize Bolivar as a hero, but Bolivar as a political figure that helped to construct Latin America. Bolivar is inside of us all with a thinking of freedom thinking against this other imposed culture related to fast food, which is US. This fast food music without rhythm, without lyrics, related to this aesthetics that comes from the US, this Manichaeism between ugly and beautiful, where we are posed as the ugly. But this culture that is so beautiful, thanks to the African people who came here, but this imported culture from the US, mainly white culture, that minimizes our culture, and Bolivar is who moves us up front, moves us ahead to the future. Altar. There is an altar also to the giving everything away, entreguismo in Spanish. But against that, we can give an example, the Andean culture, which have been exemplary in promoting Bolivarian heritage, Bolivarian fight, Bolivarian history. There's also the Andean bambucos. There is also a link between those cultures and the Frente de Bolivar, the Simón Bolívar Front of Trujillo, Táchira, up in the mountains where it flourished, this movement. I wanted also to add to this reflection, although these great imperial countries have done a great effort on trying to delete the Bolivar figure, there is also in almost every country a figure, a statue, a bust of Bolivar, because Bolivar was an integrationist. We have sung countries like Cuba, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Colombia have given cult through songs and music to Bolivar. So it's not only an artistic production, it's a cultural production which produces an ideology and imagery of Bolivar and how to make tribute to the one of the fathers of Latin America, freedom. For those days, Teresa Carreño, it's important that we consider, although there is a great ignorance, imposition of outside culture, including military dictatorships, the Bolivar figure has arisen. Bolivar is a figure that helps to construct our conscience, our consciousness. And although some of the figures that promoted Bolivar are not with us anymore, there is already a natural thinking, a natural thought that we should continue looking forward and studying the figure of Bolivar to reivindicate the Bolivarian thinking, to construct more around the Bolivarian thinking, but also to develop more this Bolivar doctrine, as we call it, the Chavez doctrine, which relates also to the independence of the countries and the scientific socialism. It's important to continue this construction of this ideology of Simón Bolívar for future our kids. Do you remember this song of Pablo Milanés of Simón Bolívar as a star? This Bolivarian tendency we should hear that the song, because it almost brief, it's a brief of the Bolivarian ideology. Probably on each of the musical forms, there should be a song dedicated to Bolivar, definitely. It's important that you hear this song.
Bolívar, bolivariano.
Bolivar, bolivariano is not a dead thinking, nor less a saint to which you light a light. A kid from Venezuela encountered him. It can be imaginary, but it can happen. And this was discussed, Bolivar and Carajito, under a tree that was saved from being burned. It is not true that Simon Bolivar, when you did your Mendy Montesacro, you didn't thought about how your arm was going to be tired. There are reasons. I was in front of Simon Rodriguez that I would free my country. They try to take memory from people. That's why to the gringo Henry Clay, they ended up constructing a Bolivar figure in your country, in our country, a Henry Clay in our country. They try to diminish your figure. If you've seen the destiny of the countries you freed and how they were conquered by the North, the powerful North, you warned us. In the name of freedom, today we come to your vision, to the anti-imperialism. Sorry that I treat you intimately. Great.
Jamás en la historia de la patria hubo tantos borrones sobre un papel escrito y el amor por el pueblo.
Navigator.
A tanta altura.
How you
Y Bolívar sonreído y lleno de comprensión le saltaba el corazón por lo que estaba escuchando. Y mirando fijo al niño de descolar.
And while I was looking, I was like a kid without school. He said, take my arms that we have to drive again. You go from city to city, waking up people.
Más en la frente para merecer la gloria.
To wake up straight so they can be glory. You spend your time freedom, giving freedom to the oppressed. There in Barlovento, there is a square with your name. It's prohibited to visit it with t-shirt. Against the laws prohibits the poor to be there. They forget the poor of Santa Marta. They are leaving our Venezuelans without consciousness, without money. The people being deceived follow the ideas that try to kill you. And Bolivar fully lived. His heart was jumping after hearing that. The result, it's clear. The bourgeoisie only promotes their interest. If If fight disperse, it's not gonna be power
No es un
victory in combat. Bolivar is not, this is the correct again, Bolivar is not
con
a
él.
saint.
Va cabalgando otra vez.
Ajá. Es inevitable imaginarse ese niño.
It's inevitable to imagine that child speaking to Bolivar in his imagination, riding a horse. Thanks, Alejandro. Thanks to Alejandro. Wait, hopefully we'll see again. Thanks, brother.
Impresionante. Muchísimas gracias. Muchas gracias, Guillermo y Alejandro. No solo
Thank you, not only for the reflection, but also for the singing, the poetry, precisely to talk about art. It's important that we don't allow for others to take our symbols, how we construct symbols in food, this right to food. How do we connect to other generations, past generations that were also constructing our imaginary, our symbolism, our identity. Our next exposure speaker is Óscar, a member of Utopix, who's gonna give a reflection. Can you hear me? First, welcome, a greeting to everybody who's listening through YouTube. From ALBA Movimientos, and also from the T-Continental. I want to begin with an issue, which is so super important. Hey, I am a historian. I am also a graphic. I've been working a lot of time with the social movements, with the Creative Command on how to organize our identity. Can you hear me better? With Utopix, we created a series of methodologies where we use technologies such as brand to create identities to social movements such as comunas. We've done so many reflections about this, and I'm going to mix some of the utopic thinking reflections with my own versus the hegemonic high culture through institutional art. Institutional art manifested principally through institutions and corporations, for example, Guggenheim, which are gold exploiters. And we could see them with this altruism. We could perceive them as altruism, very altruistic, where they dedicate their money to art, but they are just justifying their exploitation of the resources. This culture, this high culture, is in one level, but there is another culture, the people's culture, masses culture, distributed globally, instantly, and also intelligently through the social media, which is a continuity of a process, of a historical process of creating consciousness of the dominance of other cultures over ours. Aesthetic perceptions, aesthetic culture. This word in particular, aesthetics, refers to Occidental culture, and they try to reorder symbolism of all the countries through patterns where they are the organizers, the dominant voice. But what they've been doing, they are trying to dismantle, destruct
maravillosa de decirnos
specific expressions for each and identities from countries, communities.
Se van desquebrajando para darle paso a esa.
And we see every day how our communities, our identities, our communities' identities are being dismantled by this anti-culture based on values of change and not on values of use. There is another great dilemma between the culture of masses and the culture of corporations, is that the last is private. Even though we can relate with it, in reality, it's not a cultural production in terms of common construction. It's being constructed privately, and it only benefits the private corporation. And it affects us in also other ways, which it also relates and affects the production models. It is, in this sense, so terrific that we have all, to our lives, the masses culture is a culture which constructs also symbolism between the beautiful and the ugly. So we also relate in a way we also tend to relate to some things that are external to us. I see it in my kids, how they see identified with things as Minecraft, with video games, with characters and actors from K-pop and things like that. And I think, where's our culture? At the same time, in an exercise of resistance, they study music in a small school in a peripheric zone called Villa de Cura. And in Villa de Cura, they study in this musical school where they are taught to use music instruments, but to native Venezuelan music. So you can see them, you can hear them practicing their instrument with a joropo. And you see how our culture, it's been dissolved through this this hegemonic culture. So you can see this contrast between from whom are those things, the songs sang by my kids. And you can ask my kids, who's that song from? Who's the author of that song? Even that notion of authors is dissolved. There is a poem of Antonio Machado, and on which helped me to explain how we resist the other forms. He explained it through a personal experience. It says like this: until people sing it, they are not verses. In other words, until you have to wait until poetry it becomes popular for it to be called popular. What is Antonio Machado saying? For something to be popular, it needs to be patrimonial, a common good. And that's our fight. How do we identify with the patrimonial? The technology, the social media, it's so perverse. It attacks the defense against capital, the community. It attacks the community, that to who we relate daily. When they create communities dislinked, dissociated from their identity and associated to the external, there's no space for the common ground. And if there is no common ground nor communal identity, how do we create popular culture? And from my historian view, popular culture, pop culture, it's like a sponge. It absorbs. It's also anthropophagic. It devours what it's not, what it's external, and adheres the popular culture adapts to incorporate what external reference. So that's why we have like 30 types of joropos, each with different rhythms, motives, forms of singing, from elegies to mountain music and corridas. So we have a very ample range of musicality through the joropos. So this is a cycle where we devour and absorb and we adapt external references. And Bolivar is a reference, brings a reference on how to adapt the external and integrate there is a way to manifest the cult to Bolivar. The joropos and Bolivar are compared into the many versions of Bolivar that we can see. Institutional Bolivar is very different from popular Bolivar, the Chavez Bolivar. But that Bolivar from the FARC is also the Bolivar of a lot of another multiple representations. That same Bolivar subject has been represented and interpreted in so many ways. So in Utopix, we try to reinterpret Bolivar in a contemporary way. We are bringing him to present, not as more as a reflection, an answer to the new use of Bolivar by the peoples. We were laughing, making fun of a meme, an art. It's a Bolivar in a horse, which was the bicentenary image in Venezuela. It was even painted on the koi. That Bolivar, that image of Bolivar over Latin America is a reinterpretation, not over the horse, but now over Latin America. And it can be poetical, but it can also be literal in the sense that we have a blockade, a naval blockade, to avoid having a commercial, to avoid Venezuela from having commercial relations with others. It's not that we created that Bolivar. It's inevitable from the current, from the popular thinking that people today have from Bolivar. So we bring Bolivar to how people feel it today as a Latin American. We have two types of identification through popular culture. Trucan, it's symbolic. Tulacan, it's symbolic. By imaginary, I can relate Venezuela people and football. We are not a footballistic, a soccer country. We do play futbolito because it doesn't require a lot of space. And we imagine from being part of Latin America by playing football, but it's an imaginary, a construction, an imaginary construction because we are not that. On the other example, baseball, we are not sportists on baseball. We enjoy baseball. But the best sports, it's called chapita. Where you put a tap in the top of a bottle and you have to try to hit it. It's similar to baseball, but the important thing is who bats. There's pelotica de mano, which is another part of version. So the symbolic identification is that we assume a culture as ours. And there is, and you walk through your community and you have a basketball board where you can play a 3x3. It has to do with, the basketball has a lot to do with Michael Jordan and merchandising of that time. You still see people with using Jordan's t-shirt because there is an issue of consumption and property about that, around that, where people try to construct their identity. But the reality is that we could play a 2x2, a 3x3, and that's the real experience of basketball, and you could stop the transit just because of playing the sports. What is important is the public encounter where we gather together, where there's conflict, their history, where there is lack of things, but no one would ever transmit through TV a chapita game, or no one will publish. I am part of the chapita game team of this community. But in your community, you are that. And it is over that identity where we need to explore our identity now, how that community and how we consume culture, how we live culture, how we express culture in our community, within other communities, which are patrimony. Which are normally are ways to resist or at least to reivindicate our rights to express. For example, that example of basketball is the right to public space, a space that it's so difficult to gain from the youth in Venezuela. And the popular culture, It's light culture. It's about people who's been, it's also menaced, been menaced, threatened against hegemonic culture, capitalists, civilizatory, which is trying to establish order and to impose the order against how we're treated in the past, our Black people. But still this hegemonic culture still imposing ways in which we refer still to our own people. I'm whiter than you. You are darker than me. I'm gonna enhance our blood by having a wider partner, for example. And we need to be conscious of these cultural impositions that still are part of us. We have inherited years, centuries of poorness. We need our best arm is the popular culture, massive peoples. It's more than a tool or an arm, like arms. He's saying that this reflection is super succinct. But it's important to have clear some points. The value of use is also a tool. That knowledge that we share. How do you make an arepa? It's important. And the recipe. The culture is a mode of organization. That other counterculture, the hegemonic culture, it's a counterculture which is based on values of exchange. It's private. We use or we don't use. We have access or we don't. More often, people that is thinking about social transformation is saying that the power of transformation, it's more related to their knowing, their consciousness of the capability they have. One of the ways we have to fight this hegemonic culture is how, in the measure that we learn the capacities that we have, but also, for example, there is a computer and I might know how to dismantle it. But maybe my neighbor doesn't.
Podemos hacerlo los latinoamericanos. Podemos
But
hacerlo.
we gotta ask, can we do it?
Entonces estamos dándole trancazos a una cosa
And
y además ya
when we discover that we depend on something, on someone, or some country, for example, because we cannot build computers, for example.
Y bueno, eso es como para pensar en las contradicciones de este enfrentamiento. Y bueno, muchísimas gracias.
Well, thank you. This is only for you to think about some of these contradictions. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Óscar, por tus palabras. Ahí se escucha mejor.
Thank you, Oscar, for your words.
Herramientas y de los problemas.
Talking about the tools.
Latinoamericanidad hace que yo tenga máquinas y uno va haciendo lo que puede con el internet que tiene.
My technologic tools are very different from different companies, different brands. So sometimes they are not compatible. So this is part of the contradiction. We can be talking a lot of time about this, but talking about rounds, this issue about exchange value versus use value, this question about what is patrimonial and how we consider what is patrimonial. These conceptions that we generate, we construct, we build, and how difficult it is to permeate the different notions of what is and what is not. The different notions, how pertinent that we discuss the anthropophagia concept. It's very difficult, very rich. You have seen it on the social media, on the scenarios. This art, it's being made, the art, the graphics, the branding of this round Monroe versus Bolivar is made by us. I'm full of words. We don't have that much time. We better open up the mic for questions. We invite you to write down your questions on the chat. I can't promise to read them all, but at least we can begin with some of them to begin the discussion, a debate. There are questions about what significance it has to build, how we rescue our culture, popular culture. How do we construct from love, for example? How do we construct from love, culture of love instead of hate?
Sí, el que quiera.
Oscar is laughing because he's saying like it's me to answer.
Mira, ¡ay, Guillermo! Mi hermano. Te veo.
Dale tú. Después yo te sigo.
Mira, oye, así como concreto. Nosotros tenemos limitaciones de lo que nosotros hacemos por cosas que tienen que ver, primero, por la circulación del contenido, pues, de aquello que nosotros producimos.
We need to be very careful with the content, the concept of what we construct. To have an identification with something, you have to be participate of it. You have to be part of the production of it in any way. If we do a graffiti, a mural about Bolivar in a community, it's up to the community if they give value to it. But if you construct it with the community and you do it with people in a participative way, you begin not only to have a relationship with the community, but also the community, it's having a relation with the production, the product of this graffiti or this mural, this wall mural painting. In that sense, we stop being consumers and we become constructors.
Nosotros las vemos como arte, porque son bellísimas, pero encontramos en ello realización estética, pero para un yecuana, su cesta yecuana es una cesta.
For example, to a secuana, when they do the
o es una cesta de pesca que les permite pescar, o es un anzuelo, o es un arpón, o es una cesta de estas que utilizan para curar heridas en donde las ponen hormigas, ellos las cierran y de esas hormigas.
Sorry, I lost sound for a bit. But basically he's saying, he's giving us an example how we see indigenous native communities products such as baskets, that they are so practical for them. For them, they are practical elements, but for us, we see so many beautiful aesthetics elements. And in that act of production of what we need, that capacity of building and to make the collective making of things, that is the act of resistance that can make really the sense a war. With the popular movement, we did a campaign. No one takes what we fight. No one will take our one fights. Instead of saying, we have a saying in Spanish where we say, no one is gonna take what you dance, your experiences, right? So we're saying they adapt that phrase to say, no one is gonna take what we've been fighting for. The ones that we obtained from our fight. And he's giving an example of how people from different ages, including old people from 60s and 70 years old, making t-shirts with the stencil of the campaign and put it on. And the power of that campaign, it was so into them. They felt that it was theirs. And that adaptation, that inclusion,
que nosotros hemos
where
ensayado
people identify
superar justamente ese dilema que nos plantea la pregunta.
with the campaigns, is how do we go beyond the threats of the hegemonic culture. Now they are gonna give, now Guillermo is gonna talk. Now can you listen now? Sorry. Something that Chavez would have said when he talked, he will always look for references, historical references on our history, on our identity. A form of auto-reflection and how beautiful we are, and how there is a part of the question. We don't have to create a culture. We are already. We have to fight a counterculture. Again, Bolivar versus Monroe. This culture, there is a difference in cultural values. For example, the military, this military arm, this military force of the US, but they also have an industry, a great industry of a cultural industry, the Disney, music. We need to react to that. We need to identify. We have a lot of holidays. We don't have to celebrate Halloween. And now we have to celebrate Halloween. And where is San Pedro? And where is San Antonio? The holidays that we have here. And I'm not talking about other holidays that we have, but we need to react to the Halloween and that counterculture. The other thing is to rescue what we have and what we are. And something that comrade just mentioned, that the issue of participation. Because when we do a mural with quality, or we can do it with our own symbols, the community symbols. It is important, as Bolivar said, it's important for the communities to decide how it is, because they are going to appropriate with it as they constructed, as they express on it. Our culture is our form of expression, is or are our forms of expression. Bolivar would say we have to identify our cultural values. I have a daughter of 15 years old. Thank God she doesn't like reggaeton, but it's awesome. It's overwhelming how much pressure do we receive from this reggaeton culture, and we can oppose to that by recognizing our cultural diversity. One thing that is very unique to us is that we don't impose our culture. We don't impose the joropo to Argentinians. If I go to Argentina, I will enjoy the mate, I will enjoy tango, and I can show joropo if they want to enjoy it, but not to impose it, which is what the US industry of culture does. So what we have, the way is through
Muy interesante, creo que
self-identification and participation.
de ese reconocimiento, esa cuestión de lo que ya
We have a lot of,
que pase por
we have great input.
pase por el cuerpo.
We received great input from our speakers.
Esos factores de homogeneización y anestesiamiento, ¿no? Que tienen
The factors of homogenization
industrias culturales.
and numbness that causes like what is caused by anesthesia.
Están muy relacionadas entre sí, una pegadita a la otra.
And we have to fight against that.
Van a ser, las
There are two questions, one related to the other, and they are going to be the last questions,
que da también bastante cuerda a estas dos.
because I think they are for long discussion.
¿Cómo ven
They're about how do you see
cómo ven que la cultura
ways
popular pueda ser
of popular culture to be
internacionalista? ¿Cómo
strengthened from an international point of view? How ALBA Movimientos can
dentro de esto, ¿no? El desafío de una perspectiva
help
a diferencia de esta multiculturalismo no capitalista que hablábamos,
strengthen the internationalist actions, movements that you can think of that can be done through ALBA. Sorry if I did not explain it.
Bueno, como siempre, como Guillermo es el que tiene el punch.
Óscar, otra vez tú primero.
Hey,
Tú eres el que sabe.
I'm gonna go first because Guillermo's the one who has the punch. I'm gonna tell you something.
Ahorita justamente con el ejemplo que hacían de Guillermo de
A few moments ago,
Argentina y traer el joropo.
with the example of going of Guillermo as a Venezuelan, visiting Argentina and teaching people the joropo, but just to enjoy.
Un encuentro entre
I have imagined
ese canto acoplado en donde dos cantantes
an encounter of coplas,
duelo de rimas,
which is a duel between two singers.
hay manera
There's different versions. There's Oriental
llanas y hay unas maneras
and there, etc. There are different regional ways.
que es una forma
And we can think about the coplas antepayadas,
que
which are different types of rhythm, singers of different type of rhythms.
ahí hay
And we can do an encounter.
culturas populares que hacen eso mismo desde el rap callejero. Entonces,
The same thing is made with rap, the street rap, underground rap.
el video de Dani, la que me daba referencia.
They encounter each other
Pero bueno, yo-
to different countries of Latin America.
Ajá, ok, fino. Bueno, entonces que ese ejemplo, pues, me sirve a mí como para decir que
That example helps me
como tenemos historias
to explain that we have points in common
tenemos además
common
elementos
ground
culturales que se han ido segregando y formas de vida
in our different cultures
que la
and
vida del llanero
forms of living that are similar.
entonces quienes producen este tipo de música casualmente viven
Eh,
gente desde una
For example, we can compare the form of living from the gaucho
formas de producción bastante similares, por lo menos la forma de
and the Venezuelan from the
en
mountains.
esa forma de resonancia.
On those forms of how do they relate to the landscape
De las
and the
cosas que
music,
hay, esa-
we can do encounters.
esa similitud.
And there's
Un poco para
my question, why do
Colombia, Brasil, cómo es
we can be,
la de esas culturas
we can organize encounters
producción,
between different forms of production
pastoreando ganado,
that could be similar,
dedicándose a un trabajo que puede ser muy solitario,
types of works,
producido ese tipo de reflexiones,
types of
ya nos conocemos,
music,
se parece mucho.
type of poetries,
Más al sur, el
but
Brasil también tiene una forma llanera.
more to the south,
En el
South Brazil people also have similar singing to Venezuelan
Y por otro,
or to Argentina.
la
On the other side,
de
the opportunity to
hacer brigadas
share,
creativas,
to make creative brigades.
salirse de los espacios territoriales a recorrer
They can go out from their countries and visit other countries
participativos masivos
to understand
con otras comunidades.
other
En ese proceso es reencontrarse,
cultural products,
pero que también es lo común y aprender otras
but also to share the cultural production of their countries.
con lo afro.
For example, we can do it also from Afro with indigenous people,
Empezar a rearticular
mountain people,
en resistencia, quizás más amplio,
with coastal people,
nos parecemos en esto, somos diversos, y quebrando sobre todo
and more than to be similar, it's just to compare
del capital, que es como
in what ways we differentiate, in what ways we're similar, how we do things that are could be similar, how we do things that are opposites.
diversidad y potencia creativa. Siento que además encontrar esas
I
miradas
feel that from
como otros
those point of views,
no tenemos
we're gonna
pero sí
learn
un ejercicio.
how others have resolved issues that we have
La civilización humana es lo más difícil porque no
in
solo
other ways, and vice versa.
el capitalismo se ha encargado de hacerlo costosísimo. Entonces, sacar a un militante de un país para ponerlo en otro es una cosa profundamente costosa.
Capitalism has made traveling very expensive, so it's very difficult for a militant from one country to visit another country. But if we have very concrete objectives, we can definitely systematize this, and we can find ways to make this type of events, these punctual cultural events about particular matters, like a series of mapping of our cultures, our popular cultures. We would love, Utopix would love, for example, to travel and to reestablish relationship with Argentinians. I'm saying just to put it as an example and win very close, how left social movement organizers or organizations can have meetings, can meet and exchange forms of doing, forms of production. I'm totally in accord with what just Óscar said. I just want to add a detail. Even in the meetings of ALBA Movimientos, the ALBA Movimiento meetings are already cultural encounters. One of the things that the capitalists do is their mercantilize, let me see how we say this, commodify the culture. They can say culture as an entertainment and not as another way of providing or giving a message, where music is not only for as a background for having a coffee, but also as a statement, as a political statement. Painting, graphic design also brings a message, has a message. And how do we internalize that messages as part of the political dialogue? The cultural product or subject rises to another levels. For example, the Afro-Venezolan drums, no, it's not drums, it's, hold on. Drums, yeah, percussion. African percussion from Venezuela. The origins of the African drums, African percussion and dances, music and dances, were forms of resistance, were political messages. They were charged with messages. It would be great, interesting to put sculptures and singers together to exchange their points of view about culture. We need to show culture to other peoples, other countries, people, and to learn from each other. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Thanks, a lot of thanks to both of you. Before we close this event, it's important to say that the gauchos are going to be there for the round of rhythms. This last reflection brought by Guillermo. Culture is not entertainment, an afterthought entertainment. It's not an adorn. It's not ornament. Culture is not it's not entertainment. It's not ornament. We need to consider language of cultures, the different forms of language of culture, forms of language and knowledge, forms of language. Something that brings a message. These proposals of strategic encounters accompanied by reflections, discussions, debates, it will help us value the cultural processes. Well, I thank you. This last round just ended. And with the resistance and with a head up in the air. Thanks to both for your time, your efforts. I'm leaving very thankful, and I hope we see each other again in another space of